Good afternoon. Welcome to Burning Issues. This is a current affairs program on IETV. We do it every Tuesday afternoon live, and then we repeat the broadcast later in the week. So for those of you who can't catch us live, I'm hoping that you could see us and see the repeats and then tell us what you think about our program Burning Issues. Well, today, March the 15th, where are we in terms of burning issues in Trinidad and Tobago? Well, the big story today, on all the media, basically is Gary Griffith, and of course, the Prime Minister admitting that he was the one who would have gone to the President's house and dictated that, well, not dictated, but rather influenced that Ms. C. Prasad withdraw the nomination list that the Police Service Commission had last year. Well, did he do something wrong? According to the Prime Minister, he didn't do anything wrong. He did not interfere in the process. But of course, Gary Griffith, as well as members of the opposition, have written to the DPP, have written to the Police Commissioner, saying that this was a clear case of interference and misbehavior in public office. Well, this is a story that is going to be growing and growing and growing, and we don't know where it will end. But from the point of view of the ordinary citizen, the layperson on the street, what does this matter to us? I mean, it doesn't impact upon us in any significant way, save and except that we don't have Gary Griffith as the Commissioner of Police. And I am not sure whether that would mean that some people have lost confidence in the police service as being able to do all that it could do or should be doing. I don't know whether it means that we now need to revisit where we go and how we look at things. But of course, Gary Griffith would have said that for all intents and purposes, Police Commissioner job is probably water under the bridge and we now have to move on. And from his perspective, politics may be the next arena in which he will find himself into. Well, not that it's a new arena for him, but more importantly, he probably most likely will go back into there and try to change things from that perspective. Whether he will succeed, that's a whole different issue. But when we talk about the Prime Minister, and in fact, one of the media houses have been suggesting that he's probably considering challenging the Prime Minister for Diego Martin West constituency. Well, I don't know whether or not that will work for him or not, but we'll wait and see. But talking about the Prime Minister, we now see where the Prime Minister has admitted that he has, or he was the one who spoke to Ms. C. Prasad. Whether or not that means breaches, we don't know. But we know for a fact that the Prime Minister has been doing things and saying things over the last, well, for however long we have known him, some of which has been, well, challenging and in a way could put him into some degree of trouble. So we have always known about Emailgate in 2013, 2014, thereabouts, and which, I mean, literally propelled him into winning the elections in 2015. But beyond that, we've heard many other issues. So for instance, a few weeks ago, he said that he actually breached the health regulations by drinking a beer in public. Well, those are things that we know that the Prime Minister is admitting, but of course, nothing comes out of it or beyond the well, whatever he says. So this is where there's now that concern. Is the Prime Minister a law unto himself? Well, that's a whole different story, but we're going to deal with that later on. For the time being, however, sticking with the Prime Minister, last week was very revealing. So the Prime Minister went on his conversations and talked about the judiciary is moving too slowly. We'll remember again, a few weeks earlier, he criticized the public service. But mind you, isn't the Prime Minister in charge? And he's the one who is supposed to make sure that all of these things work like clockwork? And why is he now coming out after being in office for close to 7 years or 6.5 years, telling us these are all challenges for him and his government? So we really have to wait and see how that will play out. But what are the other things that the Prime Minister did tell us? Well, he did tell us, for instance, that water, there is going to be, at least WASA is going to be applying for a rate increase. We know that electricity has always been one of those issues that should be coming with a rate increase. The price of gas is going to go up. He has admitted that food prices is going up. He has admitted too, in fact, in today's media, he has actually gone ahead and says, well, look, public servants have not gotten a wage increase for the last how many years, and we don't know when they could get a wage increase again. And he's saying this in the context of simply saying that they may very well have to go without a wage increase if we are to continue and sustain the economy simply because we don't have the money. The country doesn't have the money to give that wage increase. So that's another issue that we really have to deal with as we go along. But then where does that leave us, the people? If people are not getting wage increases, food prices are going up, cost of living is going up. Oh, and the other thing, he told us, property tax is definitely coming, and it's coming. So people are going to be called upon to be spending more and more monies, and the question is, they're not going to be getting any increases, at least not as far as we know. So where does that leave us? So those are the issues that we want to deal with, and we have to deal with as we go later on into the program, and not only on today's show, but later on into the program during the weeks and months to come. But what else are the burning issues at this point in time? Well, the Paria diving accident or incident is still very much so on top of our minds. And we know for a fact that a commission of inquiry is going to be appointed. When they're going to start work, we don't know, but we wait and see. Of course, in the meantime, Paria and everybody else are exchanging public views, which doesn't really help us. But at least they are entitled to stating their positions and making their case ahead of the commission of inquiry. And then we have to talk about the whole issue of the pandemic. I mean, normally I would have started the show referring to the pandemic, but of course, today we start on a I started differently for the main reason that today, well, at least now, around this time, we are marking 2 years into the pandemic. And 2 years into the pandemic tells us, let us take stock of where we are, economically, politically, socially, medically, culturally. We have to understand the pandemic. And we need to discuss that, and we need to understand what is happening in the rest of the world as it relates to the pandemic. So we're going to take a break now and come back and start that discussion before we come back to some of the other burning issues affecting Trinidad and Tobago. We take a break now and we come back with burning issues.
Every day, normal people like you and I have questions about the law, and a desire to understand simply that which binds us, guides our conduct and our journey throughout our lives. From as simple as buying a soft drink, for you the consumer there are laws, and for the business person there are also company laws. Therefore, as aptly named, you are the law represents you. I am Umesh Prasad, criminal law defense attorney, and I invite you to tune in every week. The mission is simplifying the law, and the purpose is providing education on the relationship between you and the law and on your legal rights. An informed and empowered citizenry is key because you are the law.
Have you heard of the Beautylicious Caravan? Come partner with us at IETV. We are looking for the professionals in TNT. Are you a makeup artist, hairstylist, nail tech, a barber, or a person who sells all the professional products? We are here to share your knowledge, your skills, and do demos with you. Come on, partner on with us at IETV. Contact me at 756-1764 or annie.ramsamuj@gmail.com. See you soon at your location.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. Well, like I said earlier, the pandemic is on and we've been in this thing for 2 years now. We have to take stock of where we are and where we're going. Clearly, we cannot continue the way we have been going. This new normal that we've been told that we have to get accustomed to, people have asked the question whether or not this new normal is going to be with us for the rest of our lives, or whether it's only going to be here for some period of time into the future. Well, I can't answer that question. But what I could say is simply that this new normal, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, brings us into that point of view where we need now to take stock. So let me just start politically. I'm a political scientist, so let me start politically. Politically, we know that COVID-19 did not impact upon our national politics in the context that we probably thought it would have. We've had a general election. We've had 2 THA elections, and they all went off without a challenge. So, and people went out and voted in the normal types of numbers and so forth. Yes, we may not have had the mass political rallies and so on, but notwithstanding that, there was still the partying and so on in many instances. There was still the gatherings, and so we had our elections. But does the pandemic suggest that there's an impact on the politics? Well, from the position of the government, the PNM, they may very well say, well, no. And in fact, from the perspective of the opposition, they may very well say that it was the pandemic that caused the PNM to win the last elections, because they were using the pandemic as an excuse and were able to spend resources which apparently we don't have, but they were still spending. And that brings us to the economic question. The economic question, do we have the resources to continue? And to that extent, we have to really be careful as to how we are spending money, particularly so when we are now being told that our currency is overvalued. I believe it is the IMF who would have said that the Trinidad and Tobago dollar is overvalued by 20%. So if that is the case, then we could very well be looking at a devaluation in the not too distant future, and then tied in with all the other economic challenges that I've spoken about earlier, the rise in the price of gasoline, the cost of living and food and everything else, and plus the new taxes and rates that are going to come on stream, how are we going to survive? And to that question, I throw to Dr. Rebecca Gokul, our economist on the set. So, Dr. Gokul, how do you respond to something like that?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Raghunath. I want to acknowledge that it is important for us to definitely take stock of where we are as an economy. It is also important for us to consider what are some of the factors and what are some of the reasons why we are in the position that we are in. I want Trinidad and Tobago to know as well that COVID and the impact of COVID, yes, has compounded our negative economic situation, but but the word compounded is what I want to focus on, in the sense that Trinidad and Tobago going into 2020, going into a period of lockdowns, going into a period of public health regulations, going into a period where we saw severe negative impacts on the business sector, on all of the sectors in Trinidad and Tobago, was in the sense that we were already facing consecutive years of economic decline as a result of several other factors. So going into the pandemic, which is a global phenomenon, and that is something that we need to be mindful of as well. And this situation has shown us, and I raised it in our conversations over the last couple of weeks, that Trinidad and Tobago does not exist in a silo, in the sense that the borders of Trinidad and Tobago are porous, not just in the sense that it allows migrants or other things into the economy, but the shocks that exist and that occur in the global space because of the fact that we operate in that global space impacts us. So in the context of declining oil prices or rising oil prices, we are going to see that impact on us in this small economy. And really, and I'm happy that you raised the point earlier on in terms of where we are and the impact that the pandemic has had on the political landscape. And while I concur with you that we did not have some of the large meetings, or we did not have significantly negative fallouts in terms of timing of elections, etc., I want to suggest that politically, the management of the economy in that time period leaves much to be desired. And as an economist, standing at the end of 2021, the beginning of 2022, we are just closing off on the, or we're just about almost done with the first quarter of 2021, we are continuing to see, although there is some degree of opening up of the economy, we are seeing rising poverty. We are seeing rising unemployment. We are seeing those announcements within the public space and led by commentary from the government that wages are not going to be rising. We are going to see rising cost of utilities, and that is of course going to impact on not just persons who have fixed incomes, but the most vulnerable people in society. We are seeing a situation where the private sector is saying, well, we are continually becoming smaller and smaller, and as such, the implication of that is we are not offering as many jobs. We are seeing youth unemployment rise. We are seeing debt to GDP rising. And an interesting indicator that I came across over the last couple of days, and I want to share it with you guys. As at the end of 2022, we are also likely to see that the average debt per individual within this country, whether you are party to the decisions resulting in that debt or not, is going to be about 100,000 TT dollars. As at the end of 2022, every person in Trinidad and Tobago will be essentially responsible for $100,000 worth of national debt. And that has, of course, an implication for long-term growth. It has an implication for the extent to which we can develop certain productive sectors. It is one of the alarming indicators, I think, that we should be paying attention to. But we always talk about how are these indicators, how are these observations translating now down to the man on the street? The man on the street is going to feel it in his pocket, is going to feel it on an average day when he travels, on an average day when he goes into the grocery, on an average day when there is a decline in access to some goods and services. And it redounds to essentially a poorer standard of living for the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Before the pandemic, before 2020, there had been a decrease or recession in this country for the last 5 years prior to that. Is that true?
Yes.
And the revenue,
economic
the
growth
revenue,
was
that
slowed.
Right, and the revenue we were collecting in the country was getting smaller and smaller over time before the pandemic.
Correct.
What the government has been doing to be able to mitigate against this decrease in revenue prior to 2020? Because after 2020, it's a different kettle of fish. But just before that, what as a government we have been doing to really make a difference to kind of boost our revenue?
And that's an important question, Dr. Bahal, and it's a question that is as simple as it is complex. So we have in Trinidad and Tobago 2 main productive sectors, our energy sector and our non-energy sector. Our energy sector is a sector for which we have very little control in terms of prices, so that the amount of revenue that we generate from this sector is dependent on both, in very simple terms, dependent on both production and price. So in an environment where we know that global prices prior to 2020 had been declining, especially over the period 2010 into 2015, coming down to 2019, the price of oil on an average annual basis was declining. So in order to ensure very simply that our revenue would have stayed stable, the obvious thing to do was to ensure that production was ramped up.
Did we drill more wells?
This particular period, go ahead.
Did we drill more wells? Did we do anything to boost that? Or did we do something positive in the non-energy sector?
We saw in that period of time production declining, and subsequent to that, we actually saw shuttering of some methanol plants. We saw some severe challenges emerging with Train 1 of Atlantic LNG. And that tells us that there are some, how should I put it, some alarm bells that should go off in an average policymaker's mind regarding the long-term integrity of one of our major producing sectors. And
I'm getting the impression
this is happening in the context of the global push towards greener sources of energy, towards moving away from hydrocarbons in the context of climate change, and whether or not the strength of interventions in that time period resulted in real changes in the dynamics of that sector. Of course, in an environment where we have seen miscalculations in terms of the potential impact that gas would have, or gas production, which is some of the issues that emerged over the last month in particular, we can now also ask the question whether or not, in seeing all of these things happen, what was done in the non-energy sector to be able to strengthen the dynamics of that sector, what was done in the non-energy sector to boost the subsectors within that sector, manufacturing, agriculture. And it's a conversation that we continue to have, where we know in this time period the ease of doing business dynamics has been declining. We know that the challenges for the non-energy sector has been stark, and of course it resulted in declining manufacturing output. We see what's been happening to agriculture. So you have to ask yourself the question, what are the metrics by which we are judging the government or the policymakers within the political sphere? And it goes back to the same point Dr. Raghunath raised earlier in the show. What has been the political impact regarding governance of the economy, for example, or regarding governance of health, or regarding governance of education in the context of the pandemic? And it is at this point that we see and that we observe that the TNT economy can become globally marginalized because our growth is declining, our productive sectors are declining, our the pace at which we can link into global value chains has been becoming weaker.
Go
ahead.
Dr. Gokul, I'm getting the impression, even though we were having such major problems financially before the pandemic, that nothing significant was done. In fact, what happened during that period was there was more things happening to cause the economy to shrink. For example, the lack of production and nobody trying to drill more wells, the closure of Train 1, and again, in the non-energy sector, there was no pumping of any significant resources and to boost the manufacturing industry or the agriculture department. So what we saw happening, even though we were getting plenty of red flags, and I've heard of many commentators talking about the recession going on, we never really intervened to kind of stop the process. So when the pandemic came, there's a different issue now, which couldn't be resolved during the pandemic.
Although I want to be fair, Dr. Bahal and Dr. Raghunath, in the sense that running an economy is something that it's a complex undertaking.
Yeah, but that's not being apologetic. We want to know what the government did directly to be able to boost the revenue collection. They want to collect property tax, but that's taken from one pocket and putting in the next pocket. It doesn't increase the overall revenue of the country. What we as a country have been doing over the last 7 years with all the red flags to boost the revenue, not taken from my left pocket to put in my right pocket. I have not seen any of those things done. And in fact, you might be able to tell us more. Show me what are the revenue generating things that show incremental increase over the last 7 years. I doubt there would be any. I doubt it. I don't know for sure. But I feel to myself, nothing was being done. That's why we kept going the recession. And I haven't been talking about the pandemic period yet. That's before the pandemic, when we had $60 billion budget. Not so, I mean, whether you borrowed or you had, or whatever maybe, but you had the budget to play with. So what did we do with all that $60 billion per year? And that is my big question. I feel hurt about it because we're seeing all these red flags, like somebody walking on the highway with a child, or a child walking on the highway without anybody supporting the child. And you're seeing that from the other side of the highway and saying, but just talking about the child being there is of no value. The child will get bounced on very soon. If you see the child there, you have to stop your car, walk across the road, and pull the child away. But what the government has been doing for 5 years prior when the recession was taking place. Any comments?
No, I would leave that for the economists.
And no, I have not spoken about the pandemic period yet.
I agree, Dr. Bahal, that really what you want to see is marked intervention that targets where the gaps are. So I concur that that is indeed the case, and that is in a very simplistic disposition what the people of Trinidad and Tobago deserve. We deserve interventions and leadership that results in long-term growth.
No, I just showing there.
It comes down to what are the metrics by which you judge performance? What are the metrics by which you judge stability? And for a government, of course, the economy is going to be a large pillar by which you do so. That being said, the disclaimer I would like to suggest here, apart from the fact that running an economy is a complex undertaking that requires the nuances of budgeting, that requires the nuances of bureaucratic mechanisms. It takes time for revenues to be streamed into the coffers of the government. I know for a fact that the property tax is one of the things that we needed to consider. I know for a fact that one of the things that we also needed to consider was the revenue authority.
But that is not, hello,
getting those mechanisms up and running, of course, it's taking some time.
Yeah, but Dr. Gokul, that is not revenue generation. That is revenue redistribution from my pocket into the government pocket to respend. That is not revenue generation for the country at large.
So before Dr. Gokul responds to that, and I have to kind of protect her a little bit from Dr. Bahal this afternoon, because Dr. Gokul is not speaking on behalf of the government and cannot defend government's policies. So, but before Dr. Gokul responds to that question, let's take a break and we'll come back and we'll continue this conversation.
Hi everyone, welcome to Prime Time with Surendra on IETV, where we bring to you interviews with some of the biggest music icons in our local entertainment industry on Fridays at 9 p.m. I am your host, Surendra Ramuta. Stay tuned and keep it locked on IETV, #1 station for news and entertainment.
Prime time with Surendra, prime time with Surendra, prime time with Surendra, prime time.
We all want to save money without compromising on the best quality insurance coverage. If you are renewing your motor or homeowner insurances soon, then call us at Ekta Consultants. With over 27 years in the insurance industry, we can offer you significant savings on your insurance premiums. As agent for Guardian Group, we assure you the best quality coverage at a very competitive price. Email us at ektagroupmail@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. Are we talking the economics? We talk about the economy and the state of the economy. And in fact, our conversation really should have been what has happened in the pandemic period. But of course, the conversation thus far has not yet reached the pandemic. And the question that, one of the questions that Dr. Bahal was asking of Dr. Gokul was simply, what were the programs and projects that the government would have undertaken that would have sought the creation of new wealth? And that is what we have to talk about. How do we create new wealth? But of course, we can't, we are not in that position to determine that. That is a political position. From Dr. Gokul's perspective, however, she too has noted that there's that concern that we need to find new sources of wealth creation and new wealth generation. We can't simply go on the way we were going all the time, and we need now to develop new strategies. But having said that, we cannot speak on behalf of the state. We cannot speak on behalf of the politicians. We are mere academics to a large extent of the time who could simply give recommendations, and that is up for the state to determine and how they will proceed. But so coming now into the pandemic period. Dr. Gokul, we have had 2 years of pandemic pressures on the economy. How would you summarize what has transpired over the last 2 years and from an economic perspective, and how do we get back to some degree of normalcy when we move forward in the next few months?
So the pandemic has opened up gaps in the economy or made visible gaps in the economy that we always talk about, in the sense that there is a need to focus energy and focus attention and focus policy support in the non-energy sector, in our private sector, in making this business environment locally one that is facilitative of business, whether it is micro, whether it is small, whether it is medium-sized. What we have seen over the pandemic is a drive, of course, perhaps out of necessity, perhaps out of a host of other reasons, a drive towards entrepreneurship. And this is something that we need to pay attention to and we need to leverage, because while there is this indigenous push, while there is an intent, while there is a desire for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to be able to start businesses, to conceptualize how do we create value, and just to lobby off of your point in terms of creating long-term wealth and sustainability, there also needs to be the environment which is facilitative of growth. So things like, for example, the foreign exchange situation and the way in which that has negatively impacted many of our business sectors. We want to also talk about our ease of doing business environment, how it has become challenging to undertake something as simple as getting electricity or building out a business plan or registering a business. It is those facilitative types of interventions that I think we need to, in the context of the pandemic, reorganize our nationalized resources to focus on small business, to focus on the private sector, whatever you want to call it, the non-energy private sector. That's where our attention needs to be focused.
And saying that we need to look at those kinds of issues, the question here, however, is simply one which says, in the context of where the world is going, in the context of everything else that is happening around the world, how easy or how difficult, how challenging will it be for our country to position itself to do some of those things?
Well, I mean, I want to agree with what Rebecca said about these measures that could be used in a general way to improve business. But I mean, coming back to the pandemic period, right, in terms of economics, if we didn't do it right before, it is even more difficult to do it during the pandemic period. But what I thought the government might have done during the pandemic period, since they put all the public services to be at home, to work from online, they put all the school children to be at home, so you have teachers around there, you have public service around there, the judiciary is flat, except for a few cases that they've been doing. They could have taken that opportunity to really harness certain basic things which could make the operating processes of governance better. But rather than do so, and we come back after 2 years and now trying to figure out how we can make a business open in a faster time, how we can make the port better. It's like we have 2 weeks of holiday and hoping to restart now when we are at the bottom of the ladder, which is even more difficult. But during the pandemic period, with everything being put on reset, we could have used that opportunity to really put these processes in place, but we didn't do so. So we're going to suffer the consequences now. How do we gain back 2 years? I don't know. But even now, remember all our economics metrics during the pandemic period is much lower in terms of outcome. So now, after 2 years, we're going to the third year. What could we do? And I think Rebecca would know we could kind of fast track it, but I don't know if we have that kind of mentality in this country. We heard about the judiciary. They say, look, they want more time to put things in place. We heard about the tutor still looking for ways to repair schools that were in disrepair long before, decades ago. We hear about other sections of the economy. One public service department, one person passed through there with COVID, they closed down the whole place for 2 weeks because they feel happy about being home, but not realizing that they're jeopardizing the economy as a whole, right? So look at 1 day of blackout. We don't even know the cost, whether it's 10 million we lost in a day or 100 million because of that blackout. So the whole economics business, we need to have a new mindset, every single person, to be able to really think it through. Not to wait for now and say we're going to re-engineer, we're going to, you know, like the judiciary, when they had this problem before, they said when we have the whole of justice, things going to transform itself to a much better place. But no, we need to really improve operating processes. And that will make business faster, and people will be more encouraged to do things, not waiting a whole 2 or 3 days or a couple of weeks to be able to get a simple transaction done in the licensing office. So all these things in the economics part, we need to really, I don't know, have a new mindset to be able to kind of hasten this process. I don't know.
So one of the things that Dr. Bahal is here suggesting is that for all intents and purposes, and Rebecca, you may want to agree or disagree with me, we wasted a crisis. A crisis is not something that we should waste.
Agreed, and that's definitely something that I can reiterate, because as it stands now, inaction is crippling the economy. Inaction is crippling our processes. Inaction is resulting in a worsening of the current situation, because and I agree that we have wasted an opportunity, but in many regards it has passed. So inaction and continued inaction is definitely not the way to go. What is needed is innovation. What is needed is participation. What is needed is stakeholder engagement. What is needed is not necessarily going back to the same types of the same old ways of doing things, but rather what is important is that we assimilate and we think about where this economy is relative to the rest of the region, relative to the global sense, and work towards positioning Trinidad and Tobago and its various institutions, its various organizations, its various ministries in such a way that it is reflective of a modern economy in 2022, 2023, that because these are this is what is going to be the backbone of our economic growth going forward.
Right, and I endorse that as well. And that's why over a year ago I had said that to get you to be productive economically, the other sectors of the community must also have their basic things being done. And since we were in the pandemic, let me just collect not only clinical data, but collect pandemic data. Pandemic data meaning data on loss of jobs, people who have psychological issues, because if you're sick, you will also lose economically. Social issues, all the other issues that impact in the society. And let us collect that data. So by having that data now, we're going to know how to move forward. But if we don't collect data, how could you know where are the gaps? You know, if you don't have that data, collecting how many people die, not enough.
So basically, what we've said is we've lost a lot of opportunities. We've lost a lot of opportunities, not only in resetting, re-engineering, retooling, but rather also in ensuring that we form the basis upon which we are to move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, you are viewing Burning Issues. We're going to take a break now, and we'll come back with this conversation and ask ourselves whether or not Trinidad and Tobago is correctly positioned in moving forward, we knowing full well of all the opportunities lost thus far and the crisis that we have wasted. We take a break.
Hey everyone, I'm Ricky Kandu.
And I am Akshay Kandu.
Join us on IETV for a brand new talent show,
where we invite you to showcase your talent in the form of song, music, dance, skits,
comedy, and even magic.
WhatsApp us at 383-0655.
And you can be featured on IETV's talent show on the #1 TV station
Where culture is alive.
Join us as we explore contemporary issues facing societies worldwide. Interviews and discussions featuring local and international experts. You can participate in our live call-in segments, a program of the board of SWAHA.
Join live every Tuesday evening at 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. and prime time at 7 p.m.
Welcome back to Burning Issues, and we're talking where we are 2 years in the pandemic, and what we noted thus far is that we've wasted the crisis. In fact, there were so many things we could have done during the crisis, but unfortunately we didn't do it. And here we are today, now having to pick ourselves up and move forward. The question, however, is are we ready to really pick ourselves up? And are we, even so we may be ready, but are we keep doing it with the same pace and speed and effectiveness as other countries in the world and even within the region? Guyana, for instance, have indicated that within the course of this week, they will totally remove all restrictions. All restrictions. The only thing that they will encourage people to do is to continue to wear the mask as well as to try to get vaccinated. Barbados, too, have also decided that they are going to be removing a lot of their restrictions. And so much so that we're now hearing that in several countries of the world, for instance, things that we continue to demand in Trinidad and Tobago are now being relaxed. So, for instance, do we really need a PCR test for somebody, a returning resident who was vaccinated before they left the country? Those are some of the concerns that we really have to deal with, and we really have to ask ourselves, even though we could say that we did not do all that we should have done, question, are we really at this point where we could continue to do things the way we're doing it, at the speed at which we're doing it, or should we do things differently? Dr. Bahar?
Well, I think we did a lot of good things so far, but even though it was slow, but yet I thought in the health department, unlike other ministries, health was still managed in a way that we could still be proud about, even though it was slow. However, at this present time, we have to be a little more aggressive. The background to all this is that, look, here we are, we have this virus floating around, the Omicron virus, which is a milder strain of the COVID-19. We have few people being infected, and I'm not worried about that too much, but the hospitalization is a small amount, just about 200. And the one in ICU is just less than 10, ICU and HDU. More importantly, the deaths, however, is just 2 yesterday, which is quite good. So we are sitting in a relatively good place. Now, we have to decide as a nation whether we want to like in the last 2 years.
But should we take comfort in that sort of data? And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. Yesterday, in Tobago, they recorded over 50 cases, 50 new cases.
And I've said that I'm not worried about the number of cases. In fact, many cases will not be recorded because you could have an antigen test positive and you stay home and never report it because you're asymptomatic.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So I'm saying then that once the hospitalization as a marker and the death as a marker is a better indicator of the way forward rather than going to the infection rate right now. Having said that, we can't have the population sleeping and doing nothing around this time. We have to get back on our, because how can we get revenue to live? How can we get that kind of earning capacity? So we have to get back to our normal lives. A lot of commentators across the world have commented on normalization in various ways. So we as a country have to set targets. We want targets in terms of how much debt we want per day, or how much we would like to see being less than, how much, if we want schooling for everybody, if we want people to go back to work without face masks. We have to set our targets. Having said that, now that could always be flexible. We cannot have that cast in stone. We must be prepared to move and change with time. But at the moment, we could do a lot more in terms of our targets. And I'll come back to that normalization targets in a second. The other side to it, to be able to attain these targets, it cannot be that you're leaving it there. Well, we're aiming for that. We have to have somebody to monitor what's happening. So if we see something happening, we could change our intervention. And our intervention could be, on the other side, what are the interventions that we need presently to deliver these clinical targets? Okay, we're going to have the public health regulations to a limited way. Okay, well, I think people in any case right now, a lot of them not wearing their face masks. Okay, let us stop wearing face masks. We already have it, not in the cars, open spaces, no face masks. In families, no face masks. Okay, fine, good. That's our target. In terms of crowded spaces, in clustered areas, wear a face mask. But I'm not going to make it mandatory. Let it be voluntary. So that's our public health regulations or our thing. The other part now, in terms of what intervention in the hospital, what type of intervention we need in the hospital setting or the tertiary care setting. Are we going to, as you come into the emergency department, everybody do antigen test? Maybe not. We may say, look, in the tertiary healthcare setting, we're going to only do antigen testing on symptomatic patients. Because, I mean, okay. And so with these tertiary health interventions, public health interventions, we can move the system to attain these targets, which could be school for everybody, don't wear no face mask, social distance, or maybe the face mask is voluntary. So these normalization targets can be flexible. But at the moment, I feel we could go a little further to make us all feel a little more relaxing, because this face mask is a bother for many people, and do it that way. So with this in mind now, we could better go back to our normal duties.
But while you say the face mask is a bother for many people, some people have grown so accustomed to it now that from the time they go outside,
yeah,
they make sure and put on one.
And that's perfect. You know, they have a lot of Muslims in the country who wear clothes from head to toe. So if you want to wear a face mask, I have no objection whatsoever.
Okay.
I have no objection. In fact, I feel if I too go somewhere in a crowded place, I might just decide to put it on as well. So of course, even though it's voluntary. In fact, I feel right now, if the government decides to make face masks voluntary, a lot of people would go around not wearing face masks, and that's perfect. But we shouldn't make it mandatory. It's too long now. We have a third party telling us what to do. We can't allow that.
All right. So we need to come back to some degree of self-discipline in order that we accomplish our goals and where we want our targets that we are setting. Dr. Gokul, any final comments before we close today's show?
I just want to reflect a little bit on what Dr. Bahal is suggesting, in the sense that we definitely need to leverage some of the positive outcomes that occurred during the pandemic that did not result in severely negative productivity outcomes. And I want to reflect a little bit on our experience, Dr. Raghunath, at the University of the West Indies. Albeit at the beginning of the pandemic, there were some challenges in terms of delivering lectures, in terms of interacting with our students. But over time, there has been some degree of normalization of those processes and those platforms in such a way that now there is the expectations from students, the expectations from parents, that the delivery of certain services, certain types of education services coming out of our various departments are going to be online. I think in in looking at what worked and what are some of the positives that we can take away from those experiences, that does not require complete moving back to where we were in terms of activities, in terms of deliveries of services in 2019, is going to help us offshoot or platform into a newer way, more efficient way of doing things.
So you see, if you don't, that's what she's saying, there may be increase in productivity in some areas, but if we don't measure it, I know the hospitals have lost millions of dollars. I have known schools that lost millions of dollars. I have known other public areas lose millions of dollars, but I just guessing. So that is why we need to monitor and decide what is the quantum of underproductivity or productivity. By just saying that is not enough. We have to see in black and white, show me how many people have lost out in the day, how many, like in the judiciary, what was the loss of productivity by having this pandemic. If we don't have that monitoring system, we cannot move forward. Everybody needs to have that information. They say, look, we're doing all our best. We will have online interviews with patients, but out of 1,000 patients, you only interview 20. But
so no, and I take all of that as a given. But you see, the point about it here is simply one which says that even though we try to monitor, my real question here is simply, what would be the benefit of that?
Well, if you don't have, if I am a boss of the hospital, I'm Southwest Regional Health Authority chairman of the, and I say, look, we have been,
you have aspirations. Yeah?
We have been doing a lot of surgery in the traditional healthcare system. The private care system, even though it was ongoing, but it has not affected surgery. Everybody give a clap and applaud. But if I tell you, out of 100 surgeries per month, the hospital in the traditional healthcare system is only doing 20 or 30. Right away you say, but what are the doctor doing during that time?
No, and I agree with you. But you see, I'm asking here the value as we move
forward.
So
give it a gap to know how much wastage there is.
Right.
How many doctors can be redeployed to other areas. Right. So right now, say Augusta Long Hospital have very few patients, and another hospital have few patients. They close it down.
Right.
And redeploy the staff to somewhere else.
Yeah, but you see, my question was really about the value in the context of simply saying, okay, so we are now reaching to that stage where last week we talked about being endemic. We've reached that stage of endemic or whatever. We're now reaching to that stage where we are going to say, okay, fine, COVID is no longer challenging. We could manage it, but we have to live with it.
Right. Okay.
Right? So we're going to live with it. I mean, is it necessary that we want now to find out how much was the loss of productivity, or should we now focus on how do we maximize our productivity based on some of the lessons we may have learned during the pandemic and move forward?
I agree with you. We need to know what's happening now. But then to know what's happening now as we go along, we need to measure to see if what we're doing in terms of intervention is causing the outcome that we wish. If you decide to use some intervention to get back normalization and productivity in the health system or wherever, or in the judiciary, you have to know, well, what is the feedback from your staff and from your clientele in terms of social distancing, and is it affecting the amount of out of how many cases being resolved or being heard? So that that's where the measurement come in. If you don't have that that thing, in fact, I feel it should be mandatory that all organizations release that information. What is their productivity because of this intervention?
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been viewing Burning Issues. We've come to the end of today's show. The discussion has, I mean, what we've chatted about today, there are so many other issues and aspects of it that we don't have the time to delve into. But more importantly, the show will continue. We will continue the discussions and the conversations as we move into the future. So please join us again next week, same time, same place, for another edition of Burning Issues. Good evening.